As you will see from this presentation, it's quite extensive. I'm not going to talk about every detail that you will see in the slides or every single statistic on crop production and the like. We will share the comprehensive presentation with you so you can go through it in your own time. I'm just going to talk to the key points in each slide, especially given the time constraints that we have for this meeting. We have quite a packed agenda and 2 hours at the most. Thank you. So let's move on. We are starting with the regional overview of sorry, I'm also battling a flu. The regional overview of maize supplies in Southern Africa. Regional maize supplies should be sufficient to meet regional food consumption needs for the rest of the marketing year. As you can see from this map, structurally deficient areas in countries such as the DRC, particularly Hod, Katanga, Lesotho, and Madagascar, and Zimbabwe are likely to rely on maize imports from Zambia, in the case of the DRC, for example, and South Africa for the remainder of the marketing year. So countries that you can see that are highlighted in the dark brown or the dark maroonish color are definitely going to be have reported below average production for this consumption year. And those countries that you can see highlighted in orange are those countries that have reported average production for this year. Next slide. Just talking a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of the seasonal performance. We know that the peak of the agricultural season is over, but just to highlight that severe drought is still present across much of southern Madagascar. Abnormal dryness and drought persist still in parts of Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Botswana, despite an increase in rainfall that we have noted. Inconsistent rainfall since late December has strengthened moisture deficits, leading to severe drought in southern Angola and northern Namibia. So the point we wanted to make with the slide is that the hotspot countries that we have noted for the last 3 years remain our hotspot countries this year and probably going into next year. Our attention should therefore be on the Grand Sud, on parts of Zimbabwe, Botswana, Mozambique, and those northern areas of Namibia and southern Angola. Yeah, next slide. As we know, the Russia-Ukraine crisis continues to affect Southern Africa. Commodity prices are still rising steadily, right? They were rising steadily before the onset of the Ukraine conflict. Following the Ukraine conflict, the FAO Food Price Index averaged 150.5 points in April, which was down 1.2 points from the all-time high that was reached in March, though still 36.4 points above its value in the corresponding month last year. South Africa, Zambia, Tanzania, and Malawi, who are the 4 key suppliers of maize in the region, are still, highly dependent on fertilizer. The further rise in fertilizer prices could translate into lower accessibility with implications for planting and yield prospects in the next agricultural season. The combination of high food prices and high fertilizer prices would hit the Southern Africa region really hard, could potentially push millions more into hunger and poverty in the region, particularly the most poorest and vulnerable segments of the populations in the region. Also to note that petroleum prices are also going to be, increasing and skyrocketing already. Transportation costs for food across the region have also noted a significant increase. And obviously this will translate into higher food prices and problems with accessing food in quite a few countries in our region. Next slide. So quickly talking to the agriculture production estimates for Malawi. This is round 2 of the crop estimates, of the crop assessment. Just drawing your attention to significant decreases in production in maize and rice, particularly 16% for maize, 11% for rice, 39% for tobacco, and 50% for wheat. So this is a considerable decrease in production, even for major cash crops, even if we consider sunflower, coffee, paprika, and sweet potatoes. So significant decreases in crops noted in Malawi. Let's move on to our next country quickly. So this is just giving you the final area planted and crop production estimates of winter cereals in South Africa. On a good point to note that there's going to be an increase in wheat production in South Africa in this consumption year. If you note the first table, wheat itself is planned to increase by 1.23%. And the overall final crop in terms of tonnage for South Africa for wheat, we're looking at just around 2.2 million tons, metric tons. Next slide. This is just repeating what I mentioned in the table. If we can move on to the next country. So these are the results for the crop forecasting survey for the 2021-22 agricultural season in Zambia. Also to note that Zambia has recorded significant decreases in different crops owing to the delayed onset of rains, with late planting of rains. Late planting as a result of the delayed onset of rains. In addition to the delayed rainfall, parts of southern, central, Lusaka, western and eastern provinces recorded a combination of flash floods and prolonged dry spells. Furthermore, most parts of the country reported incidences of fall armyworm that affected some crops, especially maize. As you can see, in terms of planted area, in terms of hectares, maize decreasing by 10.69%. Same for sorghum, a significant decrease of 31%, and for millet, 33%. For seed cotton as well, and for sweet potatoes. Next slide. In terms of the yield, in terms of metric tons per hectare, you can see also a percentage change, decrease in maize again by 16%. For sunflower, soya beans, Irish potato, and burley tobacco, cowpeas, sweet potatoes, and cassava by considerable, almost 50%. Next slide. In terms of expected production from the 2021 to 2021-22 season, you can see again, nothing surprising from the other tables that we have seen. Maize, in terms of expected production, is likely to decrease by 25%. Sorghum, almost 20%. Millet, almost 30%. The same Irish potato, also. Seed cotton, also by almost 30%. Next slide. In terms of reasons for the change in production and area planted, you can see that 65% of the change in production is due to wilting, or 65% of the reduction actually is due to wilting that was caused by drought, followed by waterlogging and lack of fertilizer, and floods and heavy rain. Next slide. In terms of food security status for Zambia for this particular agricultural marketing season, most of the cereals were negatively affected by adverse weather conditions. As we can see, as of May, the total carryover stocks held by farmers, millers, grain traders, and Food Reserves Agency was around 1.5 million metric tons. Given the estimated production of 2.7 metric tons of maize and the carryover stocks, the total available maize supply in the 2022-23 agricultural marketing season is around 4.2 million metric tons. The country's population is estimated at 19.2 million. Therefore, the estimated national requirement for maize to meet the consumption demand is estimated at 3 million metric tons. Next slide. So this is quickly going through Zimbabwe. From the second round crop and livestock assessment, This slide particularly talks to, the false start of the season that we discussed in previous meetings that resulted in failed crop establishment, forcing farmers to replant several times. And during April, there were unusually heavy late rains that have been received, which should have benefited the late planted crop. But we also know that there was a prolonged dry spell in the first week of February that persisted in most areas until the end of March. And most of the affected areas included Mazowe, Guruve, Bindura, and Shamva, and Mashonaland West, including Makonde, Hurungwe, and parts of Zvimba. Most of the country received cumulative rainfall in the normal to below normal category, and we can see this manifesting in the crop results that we have. If you quickly go to the tables, Selam, you can see that all of the colors in red actually show a decrease. So you can see, it's considerable, almost more than 50% decrease in most of the field crops. Maize, 43% decrease, sweet potato, 51%, African peas, a reduction in 61%, the same for sorghum, almost 41%, pearl millet, 51%, finger millet, 60%. So considerable decreases in field crop production this year compared to last year, owing to the climatic shocks that we have just discussed. And I think we can skip this slide, Silam, owing to time. And in terms of horticulture, you can see horticulture, there was a decrease in macadamia nut production and a decrease in tea production up to 34%. Next slide. And we're going to talk quickly. I will talk quickly through the brown locust outbreak. And my colleagues that are attending this meeting can then contribute if there are any questions regarding the locust outbreak. The next slide. We'll start off with South Africa, where the brown locust outbreak in other provinces has lowered. The Eastern Cape province in South Africa is the most affected province in the country. Locusts are now said to be in the adult stage. Considerable control operations have been undertaken and training in control and surveillance methods as well. An estimated 7,000 hectares have been controlled through aerial and ground teams. However, challenges are also quite considerable. There are no ground teams in these newly affected areas, with the risk that the outbreaks may escalate and continue. It's not easy to control the villages, as some do not have camps for removing the animals. There's hesitation from small-scale farmers to use pesticides to actually control the outbreak of the pest, and some areas are not suitable for aerial control. In terms of the other countries, in Namibia is seeing the fourth wave of the brown locust outbreak, and it has been reported and confirmed in Karas and Hardap regions of Namibia. The locust is reported to be at all developmental stages, hatching, nymph, busking, and hopping to flying stages. Locust control teams have been deployed to embark on surveillance, monitoring, and control. Surveillance was intensified in the regions which were previously affected by the African migratory locusts. However, no locusts have reported so far. I think that applies to my African migratory locusts. Quite a few challenges as well in Namibia. Despite the coldness experienced in the whole country, Karas and Hardap regions are still warm. Most of the locusts are hatching and reported to be flying in swarms. Some of the breeding zones are under the game park, which make it difficult to control, and most of the areas are impassable due to the rocky landscape and mountainous areas of these areas in Namibia. Next slide. I think this is the end of the presentation on the results of the different crop assessments that we talked to and on the locust outbreak. I will now hand over to Venancio from the MBank to take us through the results of the IPC chronic analysis for Malawi. Over to you, Vina. Do you want to share your screen, Venancio?
No, that's fine. You can share from that side.
Okay. Yep. Selam, do you have it? Thank you.
Thank you, KK. Do you want to say anything before I start, or I can dive in straight?
Thanks, Venancio, and good morning, colleagues. Just to mention that, as you are aware, the IPC Chronic has been going reform, and the initial the first phase of the report of the first phase of the reform is now complete, and the draft report is available. And remember, we made a presentation some time back. Some of the recommendations that are in the reform actually have been taken on board in the Malawi exercise. I also see that Sergio is online. I'm not sure if he wants to say anything on the CFI reform process. Over.
Good morning, colleagues. I would first of all let Venancio present, and then if needed, we can close and wrap up this first session with some comments. Thank you, Peter and Venancio.
All right.
Over to you, Venancio.
Yeah, thank you, KK, and thank you, Q. Once again, my name is Venancio Nzonda, the focal point for IPC in Malawi, but also the coordinator for the Malawi Vulnerability Assessment Committee. Very briefly, I will take you through the results of the Malawi IPC Chronic report that was launched on 20th May by the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs in Malawi here in Lilongwe. Next slide, please. Yep. So in terms of the process, we together with our partners, or the partners that you saw on the first slide, conducted this IPC Chronic food insecurity analysis in Malawi. We looked at the period of 2011 to 2021, and the main analysis was conducted in February 2022. So ideally different from the acute analysis that we do each and every year. The main reason was for us to find out, focusing on the structural causes of food insecurity in Malawi over the past 10 years. And as Kuzaya said, we were doing this process while also incorporating the reforms that the GSU are undertaking at the global stage. So we, as much as we were doing this exercise, we are also incorporating the CFI reforms. The objectives of the exercise was, first of all, as I've already said, to assess the chronic food insecurity in Malawi for the period 2011 to 2021, classifying the magnitude of chronic food insecurity in the country, finding out what are our key drivers to food security, to chronic food insecurity in Malawi, but also to provide recommendations for actions. Next slide, please. So these are just chronic level descriptions where we do 4 levels in chronic compared to the 5 phases that we have in acute. Level 1 being minimal, where you have acceptable quantity and quality, livelihoods are resilient to shocks, but also you won't likely find stunted children in level 1. Level 2, adequate quantity, but inadequate quality, borderline limited resilience, but also not likely to find stunted children. Where we have moderate now, level 3, this is where we're going to find ongoing deficits, 2 to 4 months, marginally sustainable livelihood, but also moderately stunted children, and severe with seasonal deficits of more than 4 months, not reliable livelihoods, but also likely severely stunted children. Next slide, please. So this is the map for Malawi in terms of the overall results. Once we did the classifications using the 20% rule, as most of us already know. So as you can see, most of the districts are in level 3 throughout the regions. The only outliers that you're going to see from the map there are the 3 regions in the southern region, three districts in the southern region, which is Balaka, Sanja, and Chikwawa, which we classified as level 4, while in the northern region we have got Likoma and Nkadabe just adjacent to the lake there, that we classified as level 2. But otherwise, all the districts in the country were classified as level 3. Next slide, please. So this is the overall picture that you are going to get from our results, that a total of 33% are level 3 and level 4. Which is the moderate and severe, while in level 1 we have got 41%, and then level 2 we have got 26%. just a snapshot, since we concentrate very much on the moderate and severe, because these are the levels that we are going to find stunted children. Approximately 5.4 million people in Malawi in the rural areas are exposed to moderate and severe chronic food insecurity levels as per the results of our analysis. Next slide. So this is the relationship that we have between the analysis of the acute that we did over the 10 years, but also the findings of the chronic that we have just done. As you can see, the two districts that are in level 2, Likoma and Nkatabe, have got low chronic but also low acute. These are the areas that we are going to classify as low priority areas, while our big casualties in terms of chronic level 4, which are the 3 districts, Balaka, Nsanja, and Chikwawa, and these are the districts that we are seeing high chronic but also high acute. So both objectives apply to these 3 districts, short-term objectives, short-term relief, but also at the same time, long-term objectives. While for the rest of the country, all the rest of the districts, we are witnessing high chronic but also low acute, and these are the districts that we are recommending long-term objectives to address the structural issues that they have in terms of food security in those districts. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's just a evolution of the acute maps, just to appreciate how we have been going over the past 10 years, but also just to relate to the findings that we are finding in this chronic food insecurity analysis, the maps from 2017 all the way to 2021, just for us to appreciate, to say how have we been evolving. Just to mention that the districts that are mostly affected in the acute are the same ones that we are also finding to be chronically food insecure, the districts like Balaka, Chikwawa, and Nsanja, which we classified as level 4, while the rest we classified as level 3. While the districts that have been better off in terms of the acute are the districts in the northern region, and this is where we are also finding the 2 districts that are level 2, while the rest are level 3. Next slide, please. So what are our key drivers to chronic food insecurity in the country? We did an analysis of all the policies, institutions, and also of the processes over the past 10 years, the 10 years from 2011 to 2021. And our main finding was that Malawi has been having very good policies at the national level, but the institutionalization of those levels at the lower level, the conceptualization of those policies at the district level have been very poor. And that affected in terms of contributing to chronic food insecurity, especially in the district. The conceptualization of agricultural policies was poor, hence there was no realization of the goals and the targets that were at the national level. Recurrent shocks, poverty, and also reliance on poor and low livelihoods were also found to be key drivers to chronic food insecurity in Malawi. Next slide, please. That just gives you a snapshot of our analysis of the recurrent hazards per district, with the main hazards being floods, dry spells, and the like. So over the 10 years that we are looking at from 2011 to 2021, what we are doing is to record officially recorded hazards, and just to appreciate the magnitude in terms of the numbers of those hazards that kept happening each and every year. And overall, what we found out was that the floods, but also the dry spells, kept happening in most of the districts, while the others, the flash floods, were on the lower side. But that just gives you a snapshot of the recurrent hazards that we looked at over the 10 years. Next slide, please. We did look at the relationship between chronic food insecurity and poverty, while also acknowledging that there is a bidirectional relationship between food insecurity but also poverty. So we had to address that indigeneity that might be there between poverty and food security. If you are poor, you'll be food insecure, but also at the same time, food insecurity might result in you having high levels of indicators on the poverty front. So we did as far as we did that analysis, our assessment was that high poverty levels in Malawi were a significant key contributing factor to chronic food insecurity in Malawi, because as you can see from the results, almost 70% of the rural population in Malawi are living below the international poverty line of $1.9 per day. So we realize that this is having a very big impact in the purchasing power and access to food, as well as nutritional status and general health of the households. Next slide, please. So these are the factors that we found to be contributing to high poverty levels in Malawi: high youth unemployment, high literacy, high dependence ratios, limited land size, low agricultural productivity, limited opportunities, especially on non-farm activities, volatile economy, rapid population growth, but also inadequate coverage of safety nets programs. Next slide, please. We did look at the livelihood strategies just to appreciate, to say, how are these households living? What is it that they are relying on their day-to-day basis? And our analysis found out that most of these households are living, their livelihood security is very low, particularly in the southern region, Chihuahua and Sanje districts, where roughly 21% of the populations are living below the livelihood protection threshold. And this does speak to the way these people are living in terms of the acceptable standards of living, whether they are able to meet their basic necessities on a day-to-day basis. So we found out that the livelihood strategies in Malawi are on the lower side, and that most of the households are living below the livelihood protection threshold. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's just a weighted household livelihood protection scores. Then we did this for the year 2015, looking at our HEA baselines, just to appreciate, to say, if we are to look at the basic, which is 1, a weighted livelihood protection score of 1, which is interprets to say those are the households that are just meeting their basic necessities. And our finding was that out of those livelihood zones, most of them are just above 1. Okay, so as you can see, the minimum is 1.21 and the highest is 1.6, which means that these households, once they are met with any kind of shock, the likelihood of them going below the 1 threshold, which is the minimum that we would want, is very high. What we would have wanted is a scenario where we're having most of these livelihood zones going towards the 2, the 2.5, which is the highest weighted livelihood protection score, so that when any shock that happens, they might have a buffer to not go below the 1. But our analysis found that most of these zones are just above 1, which is a threat in terms of their resilience to any kind of shock that might happen. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we also looked at the wave groups in our household economy approach. We looked at the very poor, the middle, and the better off. And most of those that are being affected by chronic food insecurity, we found that as the very poor and the poor are able to their livelihood strategies, but also the means that they have for them to fend for themselves on a day-to-day basis. So our analysis of the wave groups in our HEA baselines found out that those that are affected by chronic food insecurity, the poor, but also the very poor categories. Next slide, please. Going to the outcomes, looking at food security outcomes, quality in Malawi, we found that it was very on the lower side, as you can see from the indicators on the slide. Nutrition-wise, but also dietary diversity was on the lower side. Next slide, please. Nutrition in general, looking at stunting, as you can see, Malawi has been improving in terms of the stunting levels, but we are not yet at the threshold where we can be comfortable, the acceptable threshold by World Health Organization. So despite that, over the years, we've been improving, but we are still not at the category where we can say our nutritional levels are acceptable. Next slide, please. We looked at our food security dimensions as in the middle, looking at our contributing factors, but also our outcomes, food availability, access, utilization, but also stability at all times as a pillar that applies to both of them, to all the three. And we found that these were lacking in terms of what we were finding out from the analysis. Utilization was the highest, followed by access, but also availability. So you can see that for looking at utilization, we're looking at access to safe water, but also hygiene practices, which were on the lower side in Malawi, and that does speak to the results that we are finding out in the chronic food insecurity analysis. Next slide, please. Limiting factors to our food security dimensions: land sizes have been shrinking over time, high population growth, low livestock ownership, but also low crop diversity. Next slide, please. Recommendations on the policy front, because we're not following up on the on our M&D on our policies. We are recommending operational M&D frameworks. Agricultural policies should support but also prioritize cultivation of staple crops, which should include crop diversification, encourage public-private sector infrastructure development for service delivery. Next slide, please. On agriculture, we are recommending the diversity in terms of the livestock front, which we have neglected for quite a long time, irrigation development, but also we are calling for a better coordination, but also integration of poverty reduction measures with climate change adaptations to curb efforts to curb the effects of the recurrent hazards that we found out as our key drivers. Next slide, please. Health and nutrition, scaling up nutrition interventions across the country. Interventions that are targeting dietary quality but also quantity should be enhanced, but also water and sanitation improvement programs should be scaled up to address the issues to do with utilization. Next slide, please. Addressing poverty is one of the recommendations that we're talking about, as we recognize the bidirectional relationship that is there between poverty and food security. So we are recommending programs, but also policies that are going to address poverty levels in Malawi. Next slide, please. So the report is published. Most of you might have already seen it. We are intensifying a lot of efforts to do a lot of dissemination. It's live online, but also it's available for those that might want for us to share with them. But I believe that most of you have already gone through this 49-page report. It's quite extensive, but also rich in information that is there in terms of chronic food insecurity in Malawi. So just in brief, the results that we have found out, but also launched on 20th May in terms of chronic food insecurity status in Malawi. Thank you so much, Q. I'll give up the floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Venancio, for that excellent presentation. It's really been a long time awaited in the region to see the IPC chronic analysis undertaken after quite a few years, and especially for Malawi, given the fact that we all had an understanding or ideas about the high chronic food insecurity, but we could not classify it previously in terms of severity and by levels, like, the way the IPC chronic packages it. So thank you so much. It's very enlightening and well done to you, to the MVAC, and to the IPC GSU. From my side, I just have two questions before I open the floor, and I don't want to be greedy and hold the floor, but just two questions before I open it up. In terms of the Malawi VAC, I've seen your recommendations. They're quite interesting. They're multi-sectoral. Is the MVAC going to play any particular active role in operationalizing the recommendations, in actively linking it to these relevant policies and processes that are ongoing in the country to make sure that the chronic results will be used? So that's my question to you. And then to the IPC GSU, I just wanted to ask, what are some of the lessons you learned from this IPC chronic analysis, and do you foresee any more analysis ongoing in the region, especially since the demand for chronic analysis is quite high, looking at the fact that we have high acute and we have high chronic, and we can see from the Malawi results that, high acute food insecurity in the more severe phases is linked to more severe levels of chronic food insecurity. Very interesting analysis and implications for the region. So do you plan to scale up? That's my question. But if anyone else has questions, please raise your hands or feel free to put them in the chat. So over to you, Vina and Kudzai.
Yeah, let me start on the first one. In terms of operationalization of the recommendations, what we have done together with the regional GSU is to involve all the necessary stakeholders. As you can see, in terms of stakeholder participation, this was extremely rich. We really reached out to all the partners to be part of this process. But also we deliberately made efforts to ensure that at the highest level, government is involved, but also in the forefront. As you can see, we made deliberate efforts to make sure that the Minister of Finance in Malawi is the one that is launching the report itself. So on our part, it's basically to do with making sure that all the relevant stakeholders are part of the process, but also they own the report so that they take up the recommendations on the government side, engaging the Minister of Finance, but also when the Minister of Finance was coming to launch the report, he had the blessing of the President. The President had already been briefed on the results. So that was our role to ensure that this report is taken up by everyone necessary to take up the recommendations. So we'll be in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be seeing what is happening, we'll be monitoring what is happening in terms of what is being done to address the recommendations that we have made. And if we see that nothing is really happening, we'll be lobbying to make sure that our recommendations are taken on board. But otherwise, as a starting point, we have involved everyone. We have involved people at the very highest levels to make sure that we own this together and that we take it up together as one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Venancio. Well noted. Kudzai, over to you.
Thanks, Q, and thanks, Venancio, for a very well-detailed presentation. It has been a learning process in Malawi. We've been learning as we implemented the CFI in Malawi. And like I said, we also taking on board the recommendations that are coming from the CFI reform process. However, we are also we expect to have a lessons learning a workshop when the country finalizes the assessment period that we are just entering. So we hope by around August, September, thereabout, we might be able to then do a proper lessons learning. But like I've said, we were actually learning as we implemented a CFI in Malawi. You find that the report is rich in terms of explaining the drivers, really what are the issues, and also in terms of making the recommendations smart and ensure that they speak to the various sectors and institutions within the country. In terms of the second question on another country, yes, to link to resilience and also looking at the chronic issues that we have within the region. We foresee, of course, informed by the reform process, we foresee doing another analysis for another country. But this, I cannot promise you anything as of now. But globally, we have started to look at countries we can start to do chronic. And I'm happy to say within the region, DRC is coming up. And we will most likely be able to get DRC as the next country to have concluded the CFI. I'm not sure if Sergio also wants to add. That's what I can say at the moment. Over to you.
Thank you, Kudzai, Venancio, for the lovely presentation. Very good, very good. So yes, just maybe to complement for 1 minute or two, this is indeed a major achievement for IPC, I think, and I cannot emphasize more how important is the work that you have conducted, country team in Malawi, but also GSU and all the partners. There was a wide spectrum of analysts coming from universities, not only many UN agencies represented, many NGOs, and I think the process was very, very constructive and successful. And it's a major achievement not only for the quality of the analysis and of the report, but also because it projects IPC in the new upcoming era, which is the Global Strategic Program 2023-2025, where one of the main axes will be anticipatory action. And in this respect, the interlinkages between the chronic aspects and the acute aspects of food insecurity will be explored even more. So Malawi is somehow ahead of the curve. And also I hope that the upcoming acute food insecurity already will start drawing some lessons on this interaction between chronic and acute aspects. And so, yes, the idea is that, I mean, we are drafting the global strategic program at the moment, but I can already anticipate that this chronic dimension will be important also in terms of new analysis in new countries, provided that we have an assumption and an understanding that the chronic per se is important, but its added value is only maximized if the results are interlinked and interpreted in close relation with acute food insecurity. This is what we've been advocating for many years, and we will advocate also in future. So chronic, yes, we are going to invest a lot, including in the region, but without dropping AFI, because acute food insecurity, we have seen with all the crises, unexpected crises of Ukraine, COVID, but also let's say seasonal others that were not expected, etc., remains let's say at the center of our agenda. So yes, thanks again to the whole team for the splendid work and for setting the bar very high for the upcoming initiatives on chronic. Over to you.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Kudai. And any partner, anyone online would want to ask a question, this is your last chance, so you can just put it in the chat. Any last questions? Going once, going twice. I think it's a lot to take in. Maxwell, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to thank you, Venancio and Kudzai, for the results of this analysis that they've made. I think the challenge remains with all of us to support the national governments in coming up with strategies that will actually strengthen the productive capacity for some of these communities. I think I had a conversation with some colleagues a few years back concerning the resilience development, in which this colleague was highlighting that southern Malawi has become highly dependent on humanitarian assistance. And my argument was that we do not give enough humanitarian assistance for anyone to depend on it, but also the humanitarian assistance has been made necessary because of a failure in development, and we need to enhance that productive capacity, because some of these people that now have to rely on humanitarian assistance are actually very hardworking. It's not because of a lack of hard work that they now have to rely on humanitarian assistance, but it's because the conditions under which they live and the impact of say climate change, where they may experience flash floods and drought within the same season, makes it extremely difficult for any smallholder farmer to produce enough for themselves, and even less for sale, so they can access other services. So I think this is a test case for what the effectiveness of the work that we do should be. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxwell. And you as a partner, for example, will definitely be using the IPC chronic results, right, in your projects and programs in Malawi.
Yes, thank you. In Malawi, we have a mix of humanitarian assistance and development programs, like long-term programs, and this analysis definitely helps us to identify where the most vulnerable are, but also some of the drivers of that vulnerability. I think that analysis is helpful to will help us to come up with strategies that can address the drivers, because as long as we are intervening at a manifestation level, then we are unlikely to make any dent on the vulnerability that has been highlighted. Thank you.
Good point. Good point and well noted. Thank you, Maxwell. Thank you so much, Vina, Sergio, and Kudzai. And for partners who want to access, if you haven't received it yet, please take note of the links where you can access the report, but this presentation would be shared with you as well. So you can access it later. It's also been shared on through the FNSWG mailing list. But if you still can't download it or can't access it, please write to Salam and she would send it to you. Thank you so much, team. Let's move on to the next presentation, and I hand over to my co-chair, Godfrey. Over to you, Godfrey.
Thanks, Krasha, for taking us to this far, and greetings to everyone. I'm just going to leave this time to Jones Goere, who is the regional markets and trade specialist for FuseNet, who is going to take us through the next presentation, which is on prices and markets update. Over to you, Jones.
Thanks, Godfrey, for the introduction, and good morning again, colleagues. Let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So these two charts, you have seen them earlier from the presentation from Q. It shows the FAO food price index, which has gone down slightly from the March all-time high, thanks to the downturn in the vegetable oil sub-index, as well as the cereal sub-index. We still remain above last year and average levels. The main drivers for the cereal sub-index decline are coming through from maize price declines following the harvests in Argentina and Brazil. But wheat prices continue to edge upwards, largely because of the blockage of ports in Ukraine and also poor crop conditions in the USA. Rice prices, they went up also in April because of strong domestic demand from the exporting nations, as well as high import demand from some of the buyers. So maize has been the driver of the decline in the cereal price index. Again, part of the decline is explained by the downturn in the vegetable oil index, which shed 5.7% in April, following subdued import demand for palm oil, as well as sunflower and soybeans, plus a weakening in demand outlook in China is also reducing the index on vegetable oil prices. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So these two charts represent the crude oil prices on the left and fertilizer prices on the right. Crude oil prices, there was a market correction in April where prices decreased slightly, but remain above last year and 5-year average levels, mostly because of a revision in demand forecast. There are a number of signals pointing towards reduced economic activity. We are aware of what is happening in China, so that could drive demand for oil down. And reduced concerns also for supplies contributed to a softening in prices in April. As regards fertilizer, prices continue rising, mostly because of the supply disruptions forced by the war, as well as high energy prices. So for much of this year, prices of fertilizer, particularly the nitrogenous fertilizer, are going to remain high, elevated, and above last year and average levels. Next slide, please. In terms of the impacts of the ongoing Ukraine conflict, I think this is a moving target. A lot is still to evolve, particularly with regard to sanctions and their effectiveness. But we are aware that Russia is the second largest exporter of crude oil and the largest exporter of natural gas. It's also the top exporter of the nitrogen fertilizers and a key exporter of potassium and phosphorus fertilizers. So because of the high global demand for these commodities, there is continued flow of exports from Russia for both grains, fertilizers, gas, and oil, despite the sanctions and also less willingness for some of the private traders to transact with Russian entities. But the depreciating ruble is also providing further incentives for those who are sourcing from this part of the world. So the flows of exports from Russia continue. In terms of impact, most of the lower income countries are the ones that are going to bear the heavy burden, particularly the poor urban consumers whose incomes are going to be reduced, as well as potential shortages that could also appear in some of these markets. Most poor countries have less latitude or leverage to introduce subsidies because of financial issues. But for this part of the world, the Southern Africa, the highest concerns with Madagascar and Zimbabwe, where, as presented earlier, production prospects for 2022 are already, below average. Humanitarian food assistance and grain imports are going to continue being very key, but particularly for Zimbabwe, taxes on fuel imports remain burdensome, as well as movement controls for grain, particularly maize. It's creating conditions that worsen food access for poor consumers. Next slide, please. I'm having a lag. Okay, thank you. There it is. This slide again shows what's happening with the South Africa maize markets. Both white and yellow maize prices increased monthly in April, but they remain way above last year levels and 5-year average levels. So a lot of the market dynamics in South Africa are being directed by international factors. So despite relative, abundance of maize domestically, prices remain elevated, mostly because the suffix price is tracking the export parity prices. So despite availability, prices remain very high. And this points to some of the potential challenges with import-dependent countries in the region who are likely to source from South Africa. Prices are going to be elevated going forward. Next slide, please. Again, to show you the picture for some of the countries, Zimbabwe, as we mentioned, prices are continuing to increase. April, you would think, prices start falling with the harvest, but because of the delayed plantings, that seasonal decline is yet to happen in Zimbabwe. Prices increased in April. For Malawi, there was also an atypical rise in prices in April, attributed partly to the announcement by government of higher producer prices, higher than last year. But we know in Madagascar, the season has also been poor, and production is expected to be below average. April prices, however, for maize, yellow maize, declined across a number of markets. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. Again, for Madagascar, we're showing various prices for some of the staples in key reference markets, Antananarivo and Ambanihi in the Grand South. The key highlights are that local rice prices have been coming down because of availability, but they remain above last year levels and also above average across most markets, except in Antananarivo, where government has been strong and effective in keeping the price ceiling on local rice. Imported rice prices, yes, they've been increasing for the past 3-4 months in most markets, but they remain also above last year levels and average prices. Dried cassava prices, they've responded, and mostly because of availability, but they also remain above average in last year levels. The poor are likely to have significant challenges accessing some of the staples that they need in the south, in particular, because of multiple seasons of drought seasons. There's going to be increasing, challenges and high dependence on humanitarian food assistance. Thank you, colleagues. This is my last slide. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Jones, for that informative presentation. And perhaps, colleagues, their comments, questions, and additions, I just want to leave this time for any such. You can show by raising your hand or by placing your question in the chat box. So Over to us. Kudzai, I seem to see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Godfrey, and thanks, Jones. It's a very informative presentation. I just wanted to touch base on the impact of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And as you know, many countries within the region are going to are now starting their assessments and then go to do the IPC analysis. And I wanted to see to what extent, if you have done it as FNSWG, by country, the impact of the crisis. But my concern also is linked to South Africa. We know South Africa gets a bulk of its fertilizer from that block, and most of the countries within the region also then depend on South Africa. So do we have now a picture in terms of the deficits that we might have in terms of fertilizers in Malawi, in South Africa, and what that means to those fertilizer dependent or high import countries such as Malawi. Malawi is one of the main factors that has been resulting in increased production of maize was the input program by government, and this deficit of fertilizer will have a very big impact on that program. So I just wanted to see if FNSWG have had a chance to do an analysis on that. My last one is on the worrying situation in Madagascar and Zimbabwe. I was reading in the second assessment report, they're saying actually they have a surplus of 107,000 metric tons. I just wanted to see if FNSWG has had a chance to interrogate this, knowing very well that the Grain Marketing Board might not have that capacity to store grain for a very long time. Over.
Thank you, Kudzai, for those questions. Let me start with the last one on Zimbabwe. The market signals that we are picking up for Zimbabwe does suggest that some of the shortages are artificial in the sense that government policy to restrict movement is responsible for some of the heightened price levels. When you compare prices in Harare to other cities in neighboring South Africa or Zambia, prices are, for maize, more than $150 per ton, which is way above what someone could pay in transportation costs. We are aware Zimbabwe has recently removed duty on a number of food commodities in trying to respond to part of this crisis. 2-3 months earlier, import duties on maize imports were allowed for maize, but throughout much of 21-22 marketing year, imports were restricted. So some of the high prices we observe in Zimbabwe are artificial. If controls can be minimized, prices would be, through arbitrage, could mimic what we're seeing in neighboring countries. For fertilizer, yes, prices are going to continue being high, particularly for this region, because we are a net importing region for fertilizer. Production costs are then going to go up. And the challenge is whether these costs will be passed on to the consumers. How much space do farmers have to absorb some of these costs? Certainly, part of it will be passed on to consumers, but that analysis still needs to be interrogated, whether, or how much farmers can, take reductions in some of their margins. But they could reduce use of fertilizer in the coming production season, or even switch more towards less fertilizer consuming crops such as soybeans. So we are yet to see how 2022-23 production season will unfold. But certainly, demand will be reduced for fertilizer. There could be shortages, but high prices are going to have an effect on fertilizer. For Ukraine crisis, yeah, there are only two positives for Angola and Mozambique. The oil and gas producing countries in the region, they are benefiting from the crisis, but the rest of the countries, they are having to deal with high import prices for fuel and also for wheat. Part of the benefits of high export revenues from gas in Mozambique offsetting some of the increases in fuel and wheat in prices. But by and large, the inflation levels are going to continue ticking for most countries in the region, and considering that the poor have a high component of expenditure on food and transportation within the inflation basket, the general price basket, they are going to be hit, very hard. And this could, lead to potentially some social unrest in a few countries, but something to monitor going forward. Over.
All right, Jones, I see there's another question from Justice Morena in the chat box where he's saying what was found to be the cause of food distribution / logistical challenges. I don't know which country, Justice, would you want to perhaps maybe clarify which countries this is relevant for?
Good morning, colleagues. Yeah, in the third last slide, there was mentioned that there are one of the challenges was the food distribution, yeah, like the logistical challenges. I don't know if I missed that one. So what was my question was, could there be an identification of what was causing those logistical challenges? That is what I want. I think the third last slide, the one before, two slides before this one of Madagascar that we see on our screen.
I think in terms of distribution, what we are observing in the markets is increases in freight costs. Shipping costs have gone up because a lot of the vessels, they utilize fossil energy for power. So as crude oil prices have gone up, shipping costs have gone up, as well as some of the disruptions in the logistics in the Black Sea area. We also noticed disruptions linked with China. The lockdowns in China have also created some logistical, nightmare. So these factors are creating conditions where shipping costs are rising. And even insurance with regard to Ukraine crisis has also gone up, shipping insurance. So these are raising costs and making a lot of the imported products and commodities high. Over.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, and seeing no more questions, I just want to thank you once again, Jones, for the presentation and the insights that we managed to draw from the slides that you presented. So thank you very much once again. And we want to move on to the next presentation, which is going to be on nutrition update. and Marjorie is going to take us through on that one. Over to you, Marjorie.
Yeah, thanks so much. Confirming you can hear me clearly.
Quite loud and clear.
All right. Thanks so much, colleagues, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone, wherever they are. So I will be presenting this on behalf of WFP and UNICEF, and just looking at where we are at in terms of nutrition response in the Southern Africa by the month of May. So before I get into the country updates, just to highlight one key thing that we are noting, that there has been increase in the admission trends across board, with some of the countries actually highlighting a more than 30% increase in the admission in 2022 when you compare it to 2021. Now, just to highlight some of the key issues have been in terms of, the deteriorating food security status, but also looking at in terms of the multiple issues, including the conflict, as well as the increase in the prices and disease epidemics across. Now, I'll get into the country updates. So starting off with Angola. Now, one of the key things that we have been following up is on the potential of IPC food security and nutrition assessment. So as of now, this has been scheduled for June. This will be led by the government, but with support from UNICEF as well as WFP and other partners on the ground as well. Now, when it comes in terms of for the treatment of acute malnutrition, so Angola is actually seeing an increase on the in the number of children who have been admitted for acute malnutrition, and this is compared to 2022. Now, between January and March, they were seeing around 20,000 children who had been admitted for treatment. But one of the key things that they're noting is also for the stabilization center, there has been also an increase on the in the death rate, and this is being attributed to some of it in terms of the quality of care, but also in terms of the other contextual factors in the ground. Just to highlight that, in terms of for the vitamin A, which is one of the core factors for us, there has been a little bit of, an increase, especially for the routine. But hopefully, when we get into the semester information, which of course will be collected by around May, then we'll be seeing a lot of, increase in terms of the children who have been receiving vitamin A supplementation. Now, just in terms of accelerating of the actions, what we are seeing is that there is an enhanced partnership that is currently ongoing, especially for the areas that that had been highlighted that we didn't have partnership on, specifically in the Huila province. So we'll be having additional partnership to support in the scale up. For WFP support, currently the program is covering around 83 health units and 7 municipalities and 900 localities. And currently also support is ongoing for the community health workforce. Next slide. Now, I'll just highlight, so for Mozambique, in terms of the support, we are looking at both in terms of the support in Cabo Delgado, but also in terms of support to the flood affected areas, as well as we know, Mozambique is one of the countries that also is experiencing other compounding factors with even high rates of both wasting as well as the stunting in the Southern African region. Now, specifically for the Cabo Delgado, one of the key things that the focus has been in terms of the support for the life-saving actions, but also looking at both the longer term as well as the resilience action. Now, in terms of the life-saving, both UNICEF and WFP are still supporting the government to implement the nutrition rehabilitation programming. And this is ensuring that all the package is being implemented. And then, of course, we have the nutrition sensitive actions that are being supported by WFP, which includes also actions related to nutrition and HIV programming. Now, we had a SMART assessment that was conducted, and it has been concluded. So far, in terms of the results, we really don't have any areas that have been indicating on an emergency phase based on the assessment. But just to highlight, we have an IPC that has been scheduled in the month of June that will be better in terms of consolidating both the SMART assessment, but also looking at in terms of the other compounding factors to give us a better picture. Now, in terms of the implementation, again, I think one of the key things has been in the scaling up of the community level actions. And within the mobile brigades implementation, it's not just looking at in terms of the nutrition support, but also the health elements, as well as the community level elements, including maternal and maternal health, as well as the child health actions. So far, this is ongoing in the 7 districts in Cabo Delgado, so both supported by UNICEF as well as supported by WFP. Now, in terms of the admission trends, what we are seeing, we had 15,000 children that were admitted for some treatment. And then out of this, we had 6,500 that were admitted from the conflict affected provinces. Now, for this year, we have had a little bit of a drop in the admission trends. Some of it is being attributed to the reporting trends, but also in terms of the situation being much more stable as compared to the last year, especially for the conflict related, the conflict affected provinces. In terms of the screening, what we see, there has been enhanced support for screening. So for both in terms of active screening at the health facility level, but also as part of the integrated mobile brigades. And what we are seeing between January and March, we had around 300,000 children that had been screened for acute malnutrition. And the highlight has been that most of the children that were identified with acute malnutrition were either already in the programming or were referred for programming. Another action that is actually being strengthened in Mozambique is ensuring that the IYCF action, this is infant and young child feeding, is actually response is at par, and as such, there has been intensified messaging for IYCF through community level action, but also through the health facilities. And as per the results, we are seeing around 230,000 caregivers that have received the messages. The team is planning for the post-disaster assessment, and hopefully we'll get to see more in terms of a clear picture on what the programming has been, and if there is more actions that are needed, especially in terms of the current response, but also looking at the continued response. Just to highlight specifically in terms of the cyclone response, yes, there is the complete package that is being offered, especially for WFP. We've seen implementation of the blanket supplementary programming, support to, to do nutrition sensitive actions, including, actions related to food security, as well as actions related to SBCC. So looking at in terms of the overall funding gaps, what has been highlighted, the program needs around 4.7 million, that is from WFP, and UNICEF will be requiring around 6.6 million US dollars for the complete response. Next slide. So I will highlight for Malawi, but I'll not really get into the details. One of the key things that we are seeing specifically for Malawi for this year is increasing burden of acute malnutrition, but also increasing rates of some admissions across. So if you look at in terms of by March, what one of the key things that the country had highlighted, they had around 30% increase in the SAM admission. And this is, if you can see in terms of the chart just to your extreme right, you can see a very sharp increase when you compare from January to March. Some of it is aligned to seasonality, but also in terms of the, they're highlighting also in terms of the deteriorating overall situation, including some of the impacts that they had during the tropical storms. So just to highlight in terms of for the mom children, also one of the key things that they have highlighted is also an increase in admission. As you can see, is around 125% if you compare it to last year. So again, also one of the key things that they're highlighting is just because of some of the impacts of the current food security situation. I think we have already looked at in terms of the chronic vulnerabilities, but also as a result of the tropical storm. Now, one of the key challenges that we are facing for Malawi is the high funding gaps. As you can see, for this year, for nutrition alone, they're looking at a 92% underfunding. And of course, one of the key asks is if they, in terms of helping for mobilizing of the resources to advocate for improved nutrition programming. Next slide. So just a little bit of a highlight. I think last time we had seen that, Zambia was one of the countries that have been highlighting increase in the nutrition vulnerability. So this is a country that, it is faced by the chronic vulnerability, but also we have the acute vulnerabilities as well. In terms of the admission trends, for some programming, as you can see for 2022, we have really had, especially for the month of February, they really had high admission trends. A little bit of a drop in the admission in the month of March, but April, you can see the number of children being admitted for acute malnutrition getting to rise. Again, one of the key things that they have highlighted is in terms of the overall deterioration of the nutrition status, which we are hoping that, we can get in terms of more details on the compounding factors once the vulnerability assessment has been conducted in the month of June. Again, just highlighting for Zambia is the really high funding gap as well for both, for the normal programming, but also looking at in terms of the emergency response. Next. So I will highlight Madagascar. I think for Madagascar, if you compare it for last year, we can see for this year, we really have a better improved nutrition situation. Considering the Q1, the screening that was done for the first semester, we see that we had a proxy of 8.4%. This is global acute malnutrition. So far, if you look at the map that is reflected, we really have no district emergencies. We only have 5 districts in their light, and you can see most of the districts within the south are actually in the green zone. But just to highlight this, in as much as there has been an improved situation, we note that in recovery for some of the communities and some of the households actually will take longer. So as such, one of the key elements that the program is doing is still to ensure that the nutrition response is currently ongoing, both in all the 10 affected districts that had been prioritized for nutrition, but also ensuring that there is support to resilience, which includes intensifying some of the nutrition sensitive action. On the overall, in terms of the nutrition programming, what you can see that, as management of acute malnutrition, especially for the SAM, is ongoing in all the health facilities. And currently what they are highlighting that the coverage is higher than 75%, especially if you're considering both the health facility support as well as the mobile support. Now, in terms of the moderate acute malnutrition, so for the first quarter of the year, we had 17,000 children who were admitted in January. We had 15,000 that were admitted in February. And of course, we have partners who are still continuing to work closely with WFP to scale up. For the screening, they have really seen a huge number of screening, but of course, because of the situation improving, of course, we have less children that have been identified for acute malnutrition. And those ones who have been screened have been receiving the LNS for prevention of acute malnutrition. And of course, for the WFP programming for moderate acute malnutrition, they're also reaching out to the pregnant and lactating mothers. And as you can see, for the first quarter of the year, they were able to reach 31,000 pregnant and lactating. So next, this is my last slide. And just to highlight some of the key messages from all this, what we are seeing, the burden of malnutrition overall is increasing. The vulnerability has still been sustained in most of the countries, and we are actually seeing much more deterioration and increase in admission, specifically in Angola, Malawi. I didn't get to highlight in Namibia, but we have Namibia slides that will be shared later on. But we're also seeing an increase in the admission in Namibia. And this is especially the areas that are bordering the Angola. So one of the key things that we are highlighting, there is still need to closely monitor the nutrition situation, specifically in some of the hot spot areas that has been identified, but also just looking at in terms of ensuring that there is the comprehensive support for both immediate nutrition needs, but also looking at the resilience actions. Because what we are seeing that, the funding for resilience actions still remains very low. One of the key asks is just to ensure that the humanitarian support, especially for other supporting sectors, food security, wash sector, needs to be sustained, so that of course for this, because this has really a very huge implication on the overall nutrition programming. And then for Mozambique specifically, because this is where we are really seeing a lot of access related issues. So one of the key elements is just in terms of ensuring that there is the continued provision of services, especially for the areas where we are having inaccessibility, optimizing on the community level action, but also where access is possible to be able to accelerate both the actions at the facility level as well as the community. And of course, in terms of ensuring that the support is still being extended and scaled up at for the IDPs. Thanks, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Marjorie, for that detailed presentation. And colleagues, here's our time. Those who have comments, questions, additions, it's our time. I don't seem to see any questions in the chat box. Anyone with any question, comment? Otherwise, we'll move to the next presentation. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much. I don't seem to see any questions, and Marjorie, thanks once again for your moving presentation. We're going to move on to the last presentation of the day, which is coming from World Vision. I understand Tony was supposed to present, but I think there could be some time difference issues because he's based in Australia, where he's the principal climate action advisor with World Vision Australia. Maxwell is just going to walk us through the talking points from that presentation on farmer managed natural regeneration of forestry for soil and water conversation. So I'm just going to leave this time to Maxwell. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Godfrey, for the time. Unfortunately, yeah, Tony is running behind time. We were supposed to be finalizing an earlier commitment, but I will try to highlight some of the key thoughts, and if he joins, he may then be able to more passionately describe this journey. He has been involved in this process for a few decades, and he is our champion globally for farmer managed natural regeneration. I think to just put it into perspective, the farmer managed natural regeneration is as opposed to planting trees, normally exotic trees, as a means of reforestation. And as we have learned even from our school going age, we would have challenges of looking after a tree, and the success was not always very high in ensuring that these exotic trees live and actually thrive. So you can imagine if you have to do that for large tracts of land. And if we look at, I think, the picture that was painted by Venancio and Kudzai earlier, in terms of the situation within Malawi, the drought that has caused the people to be chronically food insecure, we realize that even though we are in a region that is relatively better watered than the pictures that you see on the screen. This is largely in West African pictures where some of World Vision's work on farmer management natural regeneration started. I noticed Tony is on the or he has joined now. So Tony, I had started, but I am so relieved to see you on the call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. Apologies for being late, and greetings to everybody in the conference. Thank you. So should I just dive into it, Max?
Yes, please go ahead. We had introduced you.
Thank you. So in 1981, my family and I moved to Niger Republic in West Africa. And the landscape that confronted us was at the point of ecological collapse. It was one which could barely support life on Earth. And this was a consequence of, yes, climate change. It was certainly a factor, but also large-scale deforestation. As the population grew and there was more demand for fuel wood and also for farmland, people cleared the trees. The combination of climate and deforestation was devastating. Increased severity and frequency of drought, loss of soil fertility, wind speeds of up to 60 to 70 kilometers per hour at planting time, burying the emerging crop, very high soil surface temperatures, and because of the lack of biodiversity, even in a year where there were good rains, there would be an explosion of insect pests that decimated the crops. So this had a very, very big impact on people's livelihoods and well-being. Next slide, please. We came up with a method of reforestation that is very simple, low cost, and rapid. It's called Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, or FMNR. And it's actually not new to Africa or other parts of the world, but for various reasons, people have gotten out of the practice of keeping trees on their agricultural land. It's based on not tree planting, but regenerating trees from living tree stumps and sometimes seeds in the ground, and selecting, pruning, managing, and protecting that regrowth. So that's FMNR in a nutshell, but there's a lot more literature available, which I can share with you later on with a link. Next slide, please. The impact in Niger was miraculous, to say the least. Over a 20-year period, average tree density on farmland increased from less than 4 trees per hectare to over 40. Next slide, please. Across 5 million hectares, without planting a single tree, 200 million trees were restored on that agricultural land. And maybe some are thinking, well, so what? That's nice for the environment. How does that affect us in our sector, humanitarian relief and development? Next slide, please. By working with nature and restoring a measure of tree cover on that agricultural land, gross income, the value of what people consume plus what they sell, rose to over $1,000 per household. And across that 5 million hectares, roughly $900 million per year every year without ongoing project intervention or government subsidies, just by virtue of the fact that nature is now working for people. This benefited 4.5 million people. In addition, because of the improved microclimate, farmers in Niger are growing an additional 500,000 tons of grain every year, enough to feed 2.5 million people without fertilizer, irrigation, or improved seed. And if we look at the context, maybe again, perhaps, so what? Well, where did this happen? It happened in one of the poorest countries in the world, in an extremely harsh environment, severely impacted by climate change. And it wasn't a top-down government or NGO-led revolution. This was bottom-up. This was farmer-led. And so the most risk-averse, poverty-stricken, cautious people in the world led this massive transformation. Next slide, please. And it's proven to be sustainable. I've had the privilege of revisiting Niger numerous times. And if anything, people have built on that foundation. They've been able to diversify their income streams and their agricultural enterprises and expand that area of reforestation without ongoing intervention. And so what I've witnessed is the transformation from what was a downward spiral of degradation and vulnerability and poverty to an upward spiral of restoration, relative prosperity, and significantly, the restoration of hope, which is a power in itself. If people have hope, you can achieve almost anything. Next slide, please. And so just very, very quickly, how does it work? Well, if you have a light covering of trees on your agricultural land, you can reduce air temperatures by up to 10 degrees and soil surface temperatures by up to 35 degrees. This is very, very significant, and it can mean the difference between no crop and a decent crop, or having just a marginal crop without trees. As climate change kicks in, a 1 degree increase in temperature translates to a 10% decrease in crop yields. This is very, very significant. The interior of Africa is set to have a 4 or 5 degree increase in average temperatures. That could mean 40 to 50% decline in crop yields in a continent already suffering food shortages. And so the more we can promote this, the better in terms of food security. Next slide. Having tree cover on agricultural land increases soil organic matter. So what? Soil organic matter increases the soil's ability to retain and release nutrients to the crops, and it acts as a water storage medium. 1% increase in soil organic matter across 1 hectare translates to an additional 144,000 litres of water stored on the farmer's land. And of course, this impacts the farmer's resilience to drought. Next slide, please. The trees themselves will bio-irrigate the crops. That photo on the left was taken in a drought year. And yet, not only is the crop close to the tree surviving, it's actually thriving. How does this work? One of the mechanisms is the tree roots, the shallow roots are leaking moisture within range of the crop roots, effectively irrigating them. There are other factors as well, but this is a very, very significant finding. Next slide, please. And so to give a story that perhaps is contextually appropriate for your discipline in humanitarian relief, These photos were taken in Humbo, southwest Ethiopia. World Vision moved in there in the 1984 drought and famine and saved many thousands of lives through famine relief. We stayed for rehabilitation phase and then a development phase. Despite our best efforts for the following 20 years, to one degree or another, we were obliged to continue giving some degree of food aid. Part of the problem was the underlying root cause of hunger had not been addressed: environmental degradation. In 2006, we worked with the community to restore the forest on that mountain. Within just 6 years, and you can see the vegetation that's returned there, within 6 years, the flooding that occurred every time it did rain, the flooding that destroyed crops and livestock and infrastructure, stopped. And during drought years, the impact of the drought was greatly reduced. There were less wind, lower temperatures, and people also had alternative income sources from the reforested area. In 6 years, this historically food aid dependent community sold 106 tons of grain to the World Food Program. An absolutely amazing impact. Next slide, please. And the farmers have been able to get together. They also happen to earn carbon credits from the regenerating forest. They built grain storage facilities and stockpiled grain for the years when crops did fail or the yield was less than what was needed. And so in effect, this community is food self-sufficient, and they actually have a surplus, some of which they sell, some of which they help other needy people with. Next slide, please. And there's a greater resilience because now there's more diversity. There's a greater range of crops that they can grow, but also from the forest itself, they're harvesting fodder, fuel wood, building timber, traditional medicines, honey, and so on and so forth. So even if there's a climatic event and the crops fail, these people have built this resilient set of enterprises that ensures that they will come through no matter what. Next slide, please. And in addition, this is actually a sister project very close to that particular one. 12 springs that had dried, had returned. They've become annually flowing springs because now more water was recharging. Instead of flooding off the hill, causing landslides that used to kill people and destroy crops downstream, that water is now recharging the wells and springs and become a usable resource. Next slide, please. A study was done by the World Bank. They did a simulation, and their conclusion was that in West and East Africa, the number of poor, drought-affected people living in drylands in the year 2030, so it's a simulation, the number of poor, drought-affected people living in drylands in 2030 fell by 13% in low-density FMNR scenario, fell by 50% in a high-density FMNR scenario. So just adding to that argument that restoring the environment in this way helps to equip people to be resilient and come through in a much better state, no matter what the climate throws at them. Next slide. And in addition, in that particular project, it's a carbon trading project over a 10-year period. The forest has sequestered over 110,000 tons of carbon dioxide, and that community earned in the order of $500,000 through selling those carbon credits. Next slide, please. So yes, it's just a very quick overview. If there's time, I'm happy to welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony, for that presentation and just being on time. And thanks, Maxwell, for having, at least, helped to kickstart the discussion while Tony was joining. So thank you very much, colleagues. If we have any questions, any comments, I guess it's the best time for us to talk to Tony at this point in time. As usual, you can place your questions and comments in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand and give us a shot. So over to us, colleagues. I don't seem to see anything in the chat box, but surely there is a hand there. Justice, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony, for the interesting presentation. This is really very, very informative. First of all, I wanted to check if this interesting FNR program is there in Southern Africa region. What is happening in Sahel seems to be really good. But I wanted to check just for whether we have you have any programs in Southern Africa. I've noted that there was something in Malawi. I'm not sure if but you can tell us more about it.
Thank you, Justice. Excellent question. So in South Africa, in Lesotho and Eswatini, we've introduced the concept. Unfortunately, I don't have any recent news to know if it's ongoing or what the impact was, but it's going very, very strongly in Malawi, in Zambia. I just saw a lovely video clip. They have restored in excess of 200,000 hectares. Water springs have revived. There's more fodder, more fuel wood, better crops. So a very exciting story. And I also believe in Zimbabwe, there's some degree of FMNR uptake. And then more recently in Angola, there's very, very strong interest to do a major activity in Angola. So the principles definitely work in your region and definitely have the potential to have a very big impact.
Yeah, thanks. And also just to highlight through your chair, just to highlight that we have Sam Tembo, who has been leading this project in Zambia. And maybe Sam, you may want to just quickly make a highlight of some of the work that you've been doing and the results.
Exactly. Thank you, Maxwell and Tony, for that presentation. Yeah, we have a big program in Zambia on FMNR, and what we do, I think it's more for us working with traditional leaders, because they are the custodian of land in traditional land, which is vast land. And where most of our smallholder farmers are predominant doing their agriculture activities. And so our approach in FMNR is to identify those degraded lands, as Tony did mention. There are some lands like in the southern part of Zambia, where we have pastoralist type of farming, where traditionally people there keep animals, but most of the land has been degraded due to overgrazing. And so we delineate together with traditional leaders, identify land that can be conserved for a period of time, and the communities themselves, they do develop bylaws to monitor. We form management committees for them to manage themselves and to ensure that nobody is disturbing that land for some time. And so we see that land being rejuvenated, and after 2-3 years, people can get back to get their mushroom, for instance. Again, when you look at indigenous knowledge in those communities, they'll tell you the people that have lived long, how that forest has degraded, what were the benefits of the forest. They'll tell you the different of medicines that they would get from that forest before its degradation. And once it's been restored, they are able to go back and find some of these benefits from the forest. But this is also linked to honey production. We do train them that they begin now to put beehives in those forests. So that's in a nutshell what we are seeing, and some of the benefits that communities can testify for themselves on the benefits. So it's really a very exciting model for us and to replicate in other regions of the country. Thank you, Maxwell, for this.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This was interesting.
To see any more questions, I suspect Justice is in the long way of putting down his hand, so I don't think there's any new question. Once again, Tony, Maxwell, we want to appreciate the contribution, the presentation from World Vision, which kind of gives us hope. I like it in the sense that a number of what we've been talking about are problems requiring humanitarian assistance and intervention, but your presentation gives us hope. There is more that we can do to address the challenges that we face as a region. So thank you very much once again for offering to provide that presentation.
Thank you, Godfrey, and everybody. It's been a great pleasure. I want to really encourage you, if you're not familiar with FMNR, please go to that website that was listed on the last slide and give it serious consideration. In my view, we have a choice. We can continue giving food aid, or we can work very seriously towards preventing the need for it in the first place. So yes, I don't know what else to say except to strongly encourage you to look into this approach.
Thanks very much, Tony. Points
Thank you.
well noted.
Have a good day.
Thanks and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye for now.
All right, Sharp. Thanks. All right, colleagues. We are happy with the progress that we've made. We've exhausted all the agenda items that we had for the day. And now we just want to quickly move over to any other business. And I see Andrew has something. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very, very pleased to join this meeting. Sorry, my camera is not so good. It's not very well set. Can you see me? Can you hear me also?
Quite affirmative, Andrew. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Godfrey, and FNSWG colleagues. I took this opportunity to be a quiet listener of your meeting today because I really appreciate and want to acknowledge the continued work that the FNSWG has done and continues to do to provide a forum where we get to understand collectively what's going on in the region and also contribute to finding lasting solutions. So I wanted to take this opportunity to inform the group that this perhaps will be my very, very last FNSWG to attend, because I'm sure by now you may have known that I was reassigned after many years of working in the region. I'm very, very, very delighted, for the time that we worked together, and very appreciative for each one of you for your friendship and collaboration and partnership that we had during the many years of being in the region. So I will be moving to Ethiopia. I'll be based in the Somali region of Ethiopia, and I will be taking up my assignment on 10th of July. So I thought I should just inform you and use this opportunity to thank each one of you from the bottom of my heart for all the work that we did together, and also for allowing me to be part of the FNSWG and accepting my leadership alongside with phenomenal people that we worked with, Ruth Mufalali, Van Royen, good friend of mine, and as well as with Godfrey. At one point, we were co-chairs also. So I really look forward to continuing this engagement in new capacities, and hopefully we'll be able to get the inter-food and nutrition security working group meetings going, where we actually discuss some common issues together between the FNSWG Southern Africa, and also the one for Eastern Africa. So it's really a wonderful pleasure. And I just want to thank you all. That this is all I wanted to inform the group. Over to you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for those humble, great words that you provided. If only we had known that we're going to have such an AOB, we would have made it a full agenda item. Just on behalf of the working group, it's been a pleasure working with Andrew. Ever since he came to the region, he became popular for the right reasons. And to be honest, your contributions have been great, have been enormous with WFP, with the FNSWG, with Sadak Aravak. It's been great, and honestly, it's such a difficult time, I guess, for a number of us to know that you are living. Of course, one great author said, "Parting is such a sweet sorrow," and we may not have any choice but to say the same thing. And once again, we meet to part and part to meet. So I'm certainly sure that we certainly are going to, our ways are going to cross at some point in time. Andrew never ceased to be supportive, even when he vacated the position of the co-chair, not once, but even during his first time in office. We ended up creating what could as well be called the group of elders. And I must admit, we would always run to him and try to, when things are tight, working for the working group, he was always available to support and provide some good advice. So on my own behalf, I just want to say thank you, Andrew. And as you go to Ethiopia, I just wish you the best. And one thing that I noted of recent is that there is some very good interaction between East and Southern Africa. So it's very much possible that this is not the end of our interaction with you. It's most likely that we are going to keep on interacting, and it's not surprising that we might see you once again in this meeting. So on behalf of the working group, I just want to thank you. And colleagues, I'm seeing some messages in the chat box where, everyone is saying some good stuff about Andrew's going. And I know that the mandate that has been given to us in Croatia today was up to 12 o'clock. But if there are any with some burning messages who want to say something, honestly speaking, I'm happy to break the rules of the mandate that you gave to me and allow you to say something to Andrew, since this is his last meeting with us in his capacity working for WFP Southern Africa. So if there are any with some burning messages and you want to say it, I'm happy to break the rules to just allow us some few minutes to make sure that we say what we ever want to say to Andrew. Over to us.